We're in the final 2 weeks of the 2024 Utah legislature, so let's talk budget. Here's what you need to know. Utah's budgeting process is a little different than a lot of other states, and that's because lawmakers have to deal with two buckets of money rather than just one. So according to Utah's constitution, all the revenue the state gets from income taxes, that is personal income tax, corporate income tax, that has to go to fund public education, higher education, and some social services for children and disabled people. That's the only thing you can use that money for. Every other revenue that comes into the state, sales tax, gas tax, what have you, that has to fund everything else in the budget. So when you hear lawmakers talking about the earmark, they mean that constitutional earmark that says income tax can only fund those specific things. So the way they set their budget is they use revenue projections. That's how much money they think they're going to bring in this year, and those updated numbers, which they got late last week, showed that there should be a little extra money to spend, but not as much as we've been seeing in the last few years. And because of that, they are warning that they're not going to be able to fund everything that the rest of the legislature wants to fund. There are no cuts, but they're just not going to be able to pay for anything extra. Despite that warning that we may need to tighten our belts a little bit in terms of the budget, lawmakers are pushing ahead with another $160 million tax cut. They cut taxes by $160 million in 2022. In 2023, they added a $320 million tax cut. And this year, they want to add another $160 million. The money to pay for it, because of the constitutional earmark, comes out of future revenues that could go to public education, higher education, and those social services that we talked about. Because of the tax cuts over the last 2 years, they've already removed $480 million in future revenues from the fund that could go to public education, higher education, and social services. That's $480 million each and every year. Tack on the $160 million tax cut this year, and that number jumps to $640 million. That could go to those constitutionally mandated expenses each and every year. Now add on to the private school voucher program they approved last year, the Utah Fits All Scholarship. That was $42 million. They want to expand it by another $50 million this year. So that's another nearly $100 million that will come out of that fund each and every year going forward. So now we're close to $750 million. Lawmakers want more flexibility in how they set the budget, because with these two funds, Utah's pretty much the only state that does that. It makes things very complicated. They put a proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot in November that, if approved by voters, would allow them to tap that income tax money for other places in the budget. If that constitutional change is approved, then the state portion of sales tax on food will be eliminated. Lawmakers say they can't get rid of the sales tax on food right now because of that constitutional earmark. And here's what you need to understand about that process. A constitutional change is pretty much set in stone, but eliminating the state portion of sales tax on food, that's just a law. Legislators could decide they need that money and reinstate it at any time. But a constitutional amendment is pretty much permanent, because the only people who can propose a constitutional amendment is the legislature. And it seems highly unlikely they would undo this earmark for income taxes, especially since they've been trying to get rid of it for years.